Okay, I'm going to start. So hello and welcome. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to talk about Service Fabric. Of course, the biggest logo we could find. They've stuck on my T-shirt, so that I don't get missed for who I am. So I am Chaco Daniel. I've been with this particular team, hyperscale compute team, for around 10 years. So I've seen it grow from a small thing which we did for SQL Azure to now. Being available GA for all of you guys. So today I'm going to cover a few topics about managing your clusters and applications. So one of the biggest things I will cover basically is what are the best practices for securing your cluster. This seems to be the most important question, which I got a lot from our hub there, and also all the Q&A things. So I'll just cover that, and then I will talk about a new Azure PowerShell module, which we are shipping in PowerShell 4.0. I will talk to you about that. That actually will cover a lot of end-to-end scenarios, which I've seen customers trip up on. So that's something which we're very proud to show you. The last one, which I will also cover, is the monitoring and diagnostics and how you can use the tool of your choice. I will use OMS for it at this point. And if you want to see how to use the Apps Insight tool as well. So that's something which I have a recorded talk, which you can look up as well. So I'll wrap up with talking about what else is in the pipeline and how and when it's coming. So let me start with specifically what is Azure Service Fabric for folks who have not heard of this before. So basically, Service Fabric is the key ingredient which took tier 1 products like SQL, Link, and transformed them into cloud native applications. So there are a few things which we have already announced. Like for example, today we have the Windows SDK and the Windows on Azure available already. Then you have the Service Fabric standalone piece, which we released around a year ago. We are in preview for the Linux pieces of it. So that's going to go into GA pretty soon. I don't have a specific date in mind, but think ahead. I'm sure you will figure out an event where we'll announce it. And then for standalone, this is something which will get into preview pretty soon. We're still working on it. We're getting out some kinks out of it, and then it'll be there. And then we would be a part of the Azure Stack as well. So this actually would be a part of Azure Stack, and it will be a Ring 0 service. So it is not an add-on service. It will be a part of it. So that's something which we are very proud as well. It's still not. It will not be a part of the RTO. It'll be something that will come soon after RTO of the Azure Stack. So best practices. Okay, let's just go into this very quickly because I have 17 minutes left. So I'll cover a couple of things. One, make sure that all your so let me step back a little bit. So I'll cover. I will split this into two pieces. One, I will cover what are the best practices for Windows Server and using Service Fabric cluster on-prem, and then I'll cover the one which you deploy into Azure. So let's just start with the Windows standalone. Although it is true that for cluster security, we do support certificates, my suggestion to you and the best practice I can give you is use AD whenever possible for your standalone clusters. One, for cluster security, basically use GMSAs so that they are machine accounts, so you're not left with rolling over certs and so forth. So just make it auto, and then that's something which you can do using AD. And for client access, use AD as well. Whether it is admin or read-only, use Active Directory. That's something which is a strong recommendation from me. The second piece, which I would also say, is since you are looking at a production cluster, just get in the habit of truly using automation for your deployments. Do not just do it ad hoc, because after a while, say for example, you get woken up 2 in the morning because of an incident, you will not remember. So the right thing to do is automate it in that way. It's just a habit. And then that's two things which I would talk about very clearly, that's something which you should do. And then rolling over certs are not easy. So I would say if you are using certificates, whether it is for applications or is it for client access, make sure that's also automated. The last thing which I've seen, some of the customers hit is a certain employee left with a certificate, and you don't have a good way to now revoke it. So those are things which you have to plan ahead and make sure that is done. The other thing is which I have now started to recommend to people who are running tier 1 workloads is to start using the network security groups, if you're able to. All it does basically is control what kind of traffic goes in and what comes in. So that's one of the things which I would recommend do. And then if you are running a workload which actually is very much compliant and it has to stay compliant and so forth, and you want to audit every access to the cluster, be it read-only or admin, then I'll recommend using a gem server. So I'll cover that a little bit in a small picture format later on. So moving on to Azure. So Azure, yes, it's almost the same kind of best practices, except that in Azure we don't support AD. Instead, we support AAD. So AAD is not supported for cluster security itself. So cluster security will be something which you would use certificates for. So, but use that certificate only for cluster access. So it's cluster security. So anything to do with a client, a human reaching out or a process reaching out, make sure you use AAD. That actually is the best practice that gives you a lot of auditing, and you don't have to share your PFX with someone else to give them access. So in that way, that is the best practice, and absolutely do them. Automated deployments, that's not something which is new to this, I just talked about here. So in Azure, it's very easy to use NSGs. I'll show you one at this point in a couple of slides. So let me quickly move on. So if it's an unsecure cluster, if you look at your cluster, if it's unsecure, you would see that it uses all these resources. There actually is a resource called Service Fabric Cluster. There's a VNet. In this scenario, I have 3 VMSs, so three node types. There is a load balancer for each. And then there are some storage accounts which you have. One of the best practices is now that we support managed disks. So I will recommend that you switch your ARM templates to start using managed disks. So that's something which then gives you a lot of reliability, which was not there before. We remember, if you had looked at our ARM template before, we used to have 5 storage accounts and we used to round robin. And that's how we used to store our VHDs. This one is now actually is a fully supported offering from storage. So why not take advantage of it? So once you start to add security, of course, you use Key Vault. That's where you put your certificates, and AAD, of course, you already know, for client access. So the best practice I was talking to you about is now you can also add a NSG for each of these load balancers. So each of these node types, based on what needs to be open versus not open, you actually can configure your rules on those NSGs. And I'll actually show you one in action. So then the last one I was talking to you about was you could also shut all the access from outside world into it, and then say any operations you do have to go through a jump server. This is something which you used to do like maybe 10 years ago, but this is a good practice still. Like, as from an ops perspective, to have a jump server is not a bad idea, because then you can control who gets into it. And that's something which I would say is a good practice. So now, enough of talking. Let me show you a cluster with NSG enabled. So all I did was, there is a ARM template which I have as a sample, which is in the template gallery. So that's the one I just deployed. So this deck actually will be made available, so you guys can read it and look at it very carefully at that point as well. So let me get to the NSG template here. So I have deployed this particular cluster. This is the NSG cluster thing. So I'm in the resource group at this point. So let me just get into the NSG for that particular subnet. So I don't know whether you guys can see. Let me expand it a little bit. Okay. So the first two basically are nothing but ports my applications use. That's 80 and 81. This will be something which you have to figure out as to what your inbound security rule needs to be. If you don't have to do this way for any of the back-end nodes. It's only for the front-end nodes is where you're accessing the gateway, right? So those are the two here. And then there are two other ones, 19,080 and 19,000. So 19,080, of course, is the HTTP port. And that's something which you should keep open if you're using SFX or using any of the portal features at this point. If you're not using any TCP connections to your cluster, then you can turn the 19,000 off. But in this scenario, I've kept it open because I use PowerShell and I always use TCP for it. So that's the port there. So next three 25, 26, and 27 is used by internal systems, one for lease layer communication and some communications between SFRP. So those are something which you absolutely have to keep open for the cluster to be healthy. The next two basically are ranges of ports for ephemeral ports and application. There's something is optional from you guys. If you're not using any ephemeral ports, then you can just shut them at that point. SMB. People keep asking me, why on earth are you using SMB? So SMB port basically is used for image store. There's a service called image store which runs in your cluster. It uses SMB behind the scenes, and that's why 445 has to be open. Next range of ports, which is the RDP ports. If you plan to RDP into your box, which you should, that actually should be a best practice. That if everything goes bad, you just need an ability to reach the VM. And these are the ports for it. The very first instance is when you connect, would be 3389 and then so on. And then everything else is denied. And I don't have any outbound security rules, so that allows everything. So this is one example of it. So I thought it should be good to show you guys that. Let me get back to my deck at this point, and then go on to the next topic. So I want to touch on one best practice here and then move on because I don't have much time. So one, treat your cluster config as code. Don't think of it as if you do it once. Because if you step back and think about it, you have to be ready for a disaster where you're recreating this cluster. So if you start issuing implicit commands to add or remove nodes or change queues, when there is a disaster and when you have to create a new cluster, you are now left with inventing all these things at night or whenever else in crisis and losing a lot of time. So treat them as code. Use Source Depot, use GitHub, whatever you like. Wherever you're keeping your application source, make this a part of it. So in that way, you are having the same rigor. Never issue a implicit command to change the cluster configuration. That actually is a bad thing to do. So I'll just skip over this point to this thing, which is one of those things which was born of the number of incidents we were getting from our customers when they were trying to do the end-to-end scenarios. Like, for example, creating a secure cluster, even for me, used to be a difficult task because you're trying to put this certificate into Key Vault, get a secret ID, and if you copy it wrong, it's not going to happen. So what we did was we collected all the top 10 asks where we've seen customers either trip up or have incidents later. Like, for example, creating a secure cluster, adding or removing machines, and then also adding a new node type, or maybe even increasing the queue from a D1 to a D2. Those are things which are not very easy to do, so we have now PowerShells to do all these. This fourth one was an interesting one. So the client certificates. So till now, if you had to use a certificate for your application, you're off your own. So this one allows you to deploy the certificate into all the VMs very easily. So that's something which is there. And then everything else, yes, it's there. So let me just show you one. I have 6 minutes, so okay. So this one command I wanted to show you just because it's just one command creates you a secure cluster. It even gives you an output of the PFX into your machine. So all you're telling is create me a self-signed cert and create a secure cluster. Give me the self-signed cert so I can use it, and it's there. So I'm just going to skip my. I'm going to skip this demo for the sake of time, so you guys could try it. So I want to towards the end I have one more demo, and then I will show you what all commands there are. So test clusters. So this was one of the biggest asks as well, right? Basically saying that I don't want to spend too much of Azure cores for your test clusters. So I'm happy to announce a one-node cluster. We will support a one-node cluster for tests. So and this is something which you can do today. Go to the portal, create it, or use this ARM command. Just download the PowerShell, and all you're giving is a cluster size of 1. And it just creates you one. So only caveats I would say, this is very exciting for everyone, but the key is one node cluster is test only. Don't keep adding machines to it and call it production. So that may not be the right thing to do. So please don't do that. Other than that, you have a choice of both. The one node cluster acts and behaves exactly like a 10 node cluster. So except that it is a one node cluster, there is no reliability to it, very understandably. But other than that, it's the same thing. So creating a test cluster through Portal. Let me just quickly touch on this one. It's a very easy thing to do. I don't know whether we have. So this is. So I have half created this thing. So I'm just going to show you this. So node type is NT. So I don't know why it is clocking. So anyway, so anyway, you can go to the portal, and then there actually will be a little link which will come up, and then it will say one node. That's what is going to happen. So let me just go on to the next demo so that you guys can try it. It works. So scaling, this is something which I want to pay some attention to. I have 4 minutes left. So add nodes, basically there is a command for adding nodes. So adding nodes. So scaling out clusters can be done in two ways. One, add new node type, or add nodes. So we support both the commands, and removing is also the same way. You just change the command there. Okay. So this is for the node type, adding and removing node types. So scaling out of the cluster using PowerShell module. So let me show you that. That actually will cover a lot of other things I want to show you as well. So once you have so these are all the commands which you have there. So you can see. So let me log in at this point. Hopefully it is going to be quick. I'm hoping it'll come through pretty soon. Otherwise, I'll have to skip this as well. So I'm hoping it'll come in. Where is it? All right, so I'll get back to it when it comes back. And so let me just continue with my demo, and I'll come back to that. It might take a while. So monitoring and diagnostics. So this is something which I also want to touch about. Any production cluster has to have product monitoring and diagnostics. It needs to have visibility. So out of the box, basically, we give you 4 things. 5 things. 1, any operational events which you have, high-level cluster and node events, you get out of the box. And then we have, it actually includes all the health reports and load balancing decisions made by the system. If you're using any of our programming models, you have a lot of events which come out of that as well. And then there are system logs. So best practices, always enable diagnostics. And then also try and put in some custom traces for your applications as well. So these are also pumped out if you enable WAD, and then OMS agents and so forth. Today I will show you an example of using OMS. So let me just show you the one which uses OMS. So I have a workspace already created, and it's here. So I have a template, which is a sample, which actually it's pointed out from the document itself. There's a link to the document in the deck, so which tells you as to where to get hold of this. Of course, I have something going on with what I've deployed there, and that's why there is this notable issues thing out there. So in here, if you just look at it, so there are so many operational events, and so if you see there are the 5 channels which I just talked about, these comes out of the box for you. You can add more things to it. So now, since you guys have heard about container support a lot today, yesterday and today, so let me show you how easy it is to add container support at this point to it. So all you're doing is go search for container. I have the spelling right, so we'll just go there. So the very first thing, then say create So now it'll actually ask me to select an OMS workspace. That is my workspace name. So I click on it, and then now I'm going to go select the one that slowly come up. I think my Wi-Fi is not doing too well. It should show up. And once it shows up, I should be able to click it. It looks like I'm going red out here. And then that's all it needs to be done. I don't know what's going on with... so there should be a list which shows up, and I just need to select my workspace. And once I do that, you will see, oh, there it is. This one. And then in around 30 seconds, you should see this come up. It'll show up here. So we will let it come up. And so since I'm out of time, I'm going to wrap up, but we'll wait for it to come up, and then I'll show you. So a couple of other things. So road ahead, like we have this PowerShell, we also have a CLI module. So it'll have the same functionality that will allow you to use CLI instead of using PowerShell. Application and services are ARM resources. Today, the only ARM resource we have is a cluster. So now we will soon announce an application and services ARM resource. That means you can get all the RBAC which you are typically used to from an ARM resource perspective. So that's something which is going to come up as well. So recap. You can use PowerShell at this point. That is the best practice to do a lot of things which was a pain before. And then monitoring and diagnostics, use the tool of your choice. And I have to stop at this point. Thank you for listening, and come by our booth. Thank you.